Do you love these gorgeous little whimsical scenes? I absolutely adore little toadstool houses. So I made this little scene. I did the original drawing on Procreate, and I've also painted it as well. So I've got a grayscale version. And these are all the pages that if you purchase the templates on my website, you'll get all of these pages. I've done them as separate little pages so that they're easier to cut out, and then you can assemble them in any way that you like to yourself. But there is a suggestion as well. Now, obviously, you can print it off on colour if you want, but I'm using some recycled paper in my black and white printer for this particular one. But you do get a grayscale image on there as well, so that you can also use it to paint yourself or colour in yourself if you like. And I've got a video where I've done that, testing out some Cotman colours on my other channel, so you can see that if you like. So these are the sheets that I'm going to be using today. I decided to go with the irregular circle for my background because I want it to look very whimsical, but there is a slightly more polished circle available in there as a template as well. So I'm using this slightly irregular one, and I'm going to be using this as my background for the scene, and I'm going to be cutting it out in this gorgeous sort of navy blue felt. It's I think it's a wool and acrylic felt. So I'm just cutting out my templates after printing them off. I'm just cutting this irregular circle out, and this will make the background for my scene. Of course, you can use any colour that you like. You could do it as a daytime scene instead. I'm setting mine up as a moonlit scene of the little toadstool village, so I'm going to be using the moon from the set and also adding some stars at the end as well. But you could use the templates to create a daytime scene if you like, and you could use a circle as a sun. And instead of putting stars on there, you could perhaps add the clouds instead, and just make it a little bit more daytime-like, and use maybe a light blue for the background if you would like that for your sky instead. But I'm going with a moonlit scene, so that's what I'm using today. And I'm just using this as a template to cut out my irregular circle. So here's some light blue felt, and I did consider making one in the light blue, but I decided to go against that, so I'm using the dark blue. Now for my little base bit here for the little houses to sit on, I'm using as a backing layer this lovely green felt, and I'm going to cut that out as one piece, but I'm going to cut it slightly larger than the template. So this is the base template, because I'm actually going to layer on top some other fabric as well. Now for the toadstools, I'm going to go with some polka dot fabric for the tops, for the toadstool tops. In the main, I am actually using a little bit of floral for one of them, but I've got so much polka dot fabric because I absolutely love polka dots, so I'll be using this as the tops. And then for the bases, I'm just picking out either plain or patterned fabric, so I've gone with a little bit of stripe there, and I've also got some checkered fabric, which I think looks really cute as well, just to keep it nice and whimsical and very mismatched, because that's the look I'm going for. But obviously you want to look at your fabrics together and see what works. Now I'm using little pieces of card here to cut my templates out with. So I've printed them off onto ordinary printer paper, it's recycled printer paper. I'm just cutting them out into smaller pieces, and what I'm going to do is layer them onto some recycled card. So these are just pieces of card that I've cut from cereal packets, and they're actually double recycled because I did actually have some fabric bolts wrapped around them at one point, but once I've used the fabric up, they've then become spare and they're in my recycling pile. So I'm actually going to be using these little pieces of card, and I'm going to use a glue stick there, and I'm going to stick the cut out pieces of the template, so the pieces that I've cut out of the print, I'm going to stick them onto this cardboard, and then I'm going to cut round them once they're stuck on, and this makes a much more durable template. So instead of having to cut round a piece of paper, it's a lot easier because it sort of stays in place when you hold it down. And it just makes life a bit easier. It's also the sort of fabric that I'm using to layer up to make my little toadstools. I've added a substance called Heat and Bonlight, so it's like an adhesive, a glue, and I've got that backed on every piece of the fabric that I'm using for my applique here. That makes it really easy because I'll be able to iron those pieces of fabric directly onto my backing, and that makes it so much easier to actually sew around. So I've already got that backing on all of my fabric. You don't have to do that. You can baste your little pieces of fabric on there, or you could glue them on there. But I just really like this heat activated adhesive called Heat and Bonlight, and that's what I use for all of these projects when I'm doing applique. So I'm just cutting out my little houses, and I'm going to fussy cut all the way around them, and that way I'll be able to draw around those templates onto the backing paper, which is attached to all my fabric pieces, because obviously I'm using the Heat and Bond Light. I'm cutting around very carefully because I want them to be quite accurate. But these are all quite different shapes, so even though they're all toadstools, I've tried to make them all slightly different. I've got them taller and shorter, and they've all got slightly different caps on the top as well, just to give a little bit of whimsical randomness. So I'm going to do all the other ones as well. Now, I've filmed this because a couple of them are a little bit closer together, and I found it was easier when I cut these ones out to stick them down as the pair, and then it was easier to cut around rather than having to cut around them twice. I basically just cut them out as a little block like that, stuck them onto the card, and then I found it easier to cut those out separately. So just snipping between the two, and then cut them out individually. Now, you don't have to use all of the toadstools on the project if you're doing it. And if you like some more than others, then you could use those instead. But I cut them all out, and I'm going to use all of them in my little scene. And what I have done is given you 2 different scenes in the printable pack, and then you will be able to choose between those if you like. I've coloured them to give you an example, but of course you're probably going to be using lots of different fabric. You might even use this as a collage, so you might even be picking out some different papers, and you can choose absolutely any colours that you like, anything that you think goes together or doesn't go together, because the whole point of this is it's sort of a mismatch thing. So you might want to stick to a certain colour scheme, or you might want to be wildly different. I like the very much the patchwork, the randomness of this, and that's why I chose so many different types of fabric for my particular project. And I am going to be doing one of these as a collage as well, and I'll be using some hand-painted papers for this. So I'll let you know when I film that, and I'll upload that video either to this or the other channel. Now, for the little piece that's going to go on the base, so for the little toadstools to sit on, I cut it out of the green felt, but like I said before, I do cut it slightly larger than the template. And I want it to just go around so that you've got a little bit of a border when I add the pieces of fabric. Now I'm then going to add this onto some card like I did with the other templates. I'm going to stick it onto some card, and then I'm going to cut it so that it's in 3 pieces, because I want the outer pieces and that inner piece there to be different colour fabric. So I'm using this lovely blue fabric with little flowers on, and also a lovely pink ditzy floral fabric. So I've cut some of that out using the template, and then I have cut some out in the pink as well. I decided which one I wanted to go in the middle and which one I wanted to go on the outside. You could of course just use one colour fabric if you like, but I decided to go with the pink flowers on the sides and then the blue on the inside. So I did cut out the blue as one whole piece, but it's slightly smaller than the green, and that just makes it easier to then add the little pink pieces on top of that as well. So I'll have several layers of fabric that I'll be sewing through when I sew these down. So this is just a quick demo on what happens when you've got this Heat and Bond Light. I basically pulled off the backing paper and just layer it onto the felt, or whichever background you're using, and then I use an iron, which is a sort of a medium heat. I think it's 2 spots, and it's got no steam, and then you just hold the iron onto the top of the fabric just for a few seconds, and it melts that glue and it sets the fabric and glues it together. But it's a very lightweight glue, so you can still sew through it. The Heat and Bond does come in a in other types as well. So there are types that you don't sew through, but this particular one, because I know that I'm going to be sewing through the project, I use the Heat and Bond Light for it. So I'm just using my iron to set that glue, and then that makes it nice and easy to sew through. Now this is the first part, so what I'm doing is getting my thread and sewing all the way around that and making sure that every edge is sewn. Now, I'm just using a running stitch just to make sure that it's stuck down properly. I won't be doing any fancy stitches on this project at all. I'm literally sticking to running stitch, and when I do the embellishments later on, I decided not to actually stitch the windows and doors. I'm using a different method, so you'll see that later. But if I was, I'd probably use a back stitch around the windows and doors. And of course you could use some embroidery stitches with these little mushrooms. You could add some little flowers perhaps going up the side for the star. Perhaps you could get a little bit more into the embroidery stitches for doing the stars and even the moon and things like that. But I've kept it really, really simple. I'm literally just using a running stitch pretty much for everything. So onto the little toadstools. So like I said, I have given you a scene there that you can refer to. There are two there, so it gives you like another example. But for this particular one, I'm going to go with that. I want the toadstools to go into the middle as well. Now, when it turns out, I move them to one side anyway, so I move them slightly anyway. So basically, just fiddle around with them and you decide whereabouts you want them to go. I tended to put the taller ones at the back, and I like the smaller ones at the front. I imagine like little tiny fairies living in the front ones. I just really like those cute little ones at the front, and I wanted to be able to see the tall ones at the back. So, and it's really nice because you can layer some of the little toadstools in front of the larger houses. So it's a little bit like a photo shoot at school where they get all the tall kids to stand at the back and all the smaller ones are in the front. So yeah, I just played around and rearranged it. Now I've got my little toadstools just arranged in the order that I want, and I've got my fabric pieces cut out ready behind each of these little toadstools ready to stick on. So once I've got an idea of where I want to position them all, then I will take the fabric toadstools and just put them in position, and then I'll remove the heat and bond paper from the back of them, and then I will stick them down using the iron, and then I will go and sew all the way around each one individually. So now I'm happy with that configuration, so I'm just going to remove the paper template from the top of my pre-cut little pieces of fabric, and then we'll see what the colours look like together. There may well be a bit of shuffling around at this point, but once you're happy with the configuration that you've got, then just remove your heat and bond light. If you're using the same thing, just remove that paper backing and then stick them down using the iron so that it's easier to sew through. Now, do make sure that you've got enough space for your moon or your sun or whatever you're putting in the sky. And if you're going to be adding this backing piece onto a picture, for example, maybe, or using it as a patch for something, then make sure you've got enough space around the edge to sew this particular patch onto whatever it is you're putting it on. So just getting them all lined up and then using the heat of the iron to melt that glue and to get them all stuck down. You have to be careful at this stage and not to accidentally move your little toadstool caps. So just make sure that they're all stuck down. Now, of course, like I said, you don't have to use the heat and bond light for this project. I think it makes it so much easier, and it's an essential for me. And of course, I've already got lots and lots of fabric with it stuck to the back of, because I used to do this for people on a regular basis. Now I've got a lot left. But you could easily just use cotton to tack it down if you can bother to do that, or use the glue stick, and I do that quite a lot. So you can see that I've just gone round the edge there using the cotton thread, and I have used a running stitch and made sure that they're all neatly stuck down. Now, for the windows and the doors and everything else, we are looking at the different options. So you can use, again, an iron-on fabric, for example. For the moon, I use a sparkly fabric. And for the details on the doors and the windows, you could use some pens if you like to do that. And I do use some of the pens, but I also use this fabric medium with some acrylic paint. I do have some puff paints there that are for fabric as well, but I didn't use them on this occasion. You could also use embroidery floss if you wanted, and perhaps do a satin stitch for the windows and go around the outside in a back stitch. But I decided to use some of the fabric medium with the acrylic paint, and then I went in with some Inktense pencils to make it pretty colours, and I also used some pen to just line around them instead of stitching. Now, you could use some embellishments. I am actually using some sequins for my stars, and I can sew those on, but you could use some strong glue if you wanted to, and if you didn't want to sew them on. Now, this is me popping some of the acrylic paint on for the windows and doors, and I went with a white paint, as you can see. Now, I could have used a black to line around the outside, but I chose to use a pen instead. Obviously, make sure that it's dry before using any colour on it. So I do bring in the Inktense pencils once it's completely dry, and I just colour basically into all the windows with a nice yellow colour, and then I activate that using a bit of water on a brush, and that just makes it nice and bright. And I do that with all the windows, and then I use different colours for all of the doors. And in theory, this should then not move, but I do heat set it anyway using my heat gun, make sure that it was dry so I didn't smudge it. And then I used my pen for the additional details there. I did actually go in with a brown pen. I started to use a black pen and decided that was too harsh, so I went in with a brown pen. So I've used some gorgeous little sequins and also some sparkly fabric for the moon. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing this. If you have, give me a thumbs up. And if you want the templates, then they're available on my website, and all the pages should be there for you. There are no instructions with the set. It is literally just the print of all of the templates. But obviously there's this video, and you can always reach out if you want any more information. So hopefully you've enjoyed seeing this. If you have, give me a thumbs up, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care. Bye.